So how does a tiny minority manage to keep control over an entire country? Well, a 1975 UNESCO report gives us a fascinating and pretty chilling blueprint. It breaks down the whole system of control in what was then called Rhodesia, and we're going to dig into how it all worked by looking at its three main pillars: land, labor, and law.
Right off the bat, the official story, as this UNESCO report points out, started with a flat-out denial. This claim, though, stood in stark contrast to the reality for millions of people. And, it immediately makes you ask the big question. If this system wasn't apartheid, then what on earth was it?
The official phrase they used was the Rhodesian way of life. But what did that actually mean in practice? Well, we're about to see how it was carefully built on those three interconnected pillars I mentioned: land, labor, and law.
Okay, so first things first, it all began with the land. I mean, to really get how the entire society was put together, you have to start with how the ground beneath their feet was literally divided up.
Now, on paper, the 1969 Land Tenure Act seems, well, almost perfectly fair, doesn't it? The land was basically split right down the middle. You've got nearly identical amounts of acreage set aside for Europeans and for Africans. At first glance, you might just shrug and not see a problem.
But here's the context that changes absolutely everything. That equal split was shared by wildly different numbers of people. You have about 5 million Africans on one half and fewer than 250,000 Europeans on the other. Suddenly, those numbers reveal a staggering, almost unbelievable disparity.
And the inequality went so much deeper than just population density. This wasn't just about quantity, it was about quality. The division was totally strategic. The best, most fertile land for farming, all the critical infrastructure like roads and railways, the economic hubs and cities, all of it was designated as European areas. This effectively cut the African population off from the country's economic lifeblood.
To see the real human cost of all this, just look at the story of the Tanguina people. They'd lived on their ancestral lands for generations, but it was sold right out from under them back in 1905. And get this, they didn't even know for another 60 years until the authorities started trying to forcibly kick them out. Their story really became a powerful symbol of this dispossession.
So this complete control over the land, it created the foundation for the second pillar, labor. It's a pretty direct line, right? When people are pushed off their land, they have very little choice but to go look for work in a cash economy, and usually on terms dictated by the people in power.
The legal framework here was just incredibly blunt. The Industrial Conciliation Act, this was the main law for any kind of industrial bargaining. It had this definition of an employee, and it explicitly says it shall not include a native. So legally speaking, the vast majority of the entire workforce didn't even exist as employees.
And the economic result of that exclusion, well, it's crystal clear. Just look at this widening gap. In 1965, the average white worker earned about 10 times more than the average African worker. Fast forward to 1972, and that gap had actually grown even bigger. This wasn't some accident of the market, it was a direct outcome of the legal system they'd built.
So for the millions of workers who weren't even considered employees, this was the law that governed them, the Master and Servants Act. The name alone tells you everything, doesn't it? It turned simple workplace problems into criminal offenses. It legally set up the entire dynamic. One group was the master, and the other was the servant.
Which brings us to the third and final pillar, the one that basically locked everything else in place, the law itself. A legal and political system was meticulously, carefully crafted to make sure that this whole structure of land and labor control would be permanent.
The report describes what was essentially a system of two governments. For the white minority, you had a familiar parliamentary democracy, based on the British model. But the African majority, they weren't governed, they were administered. A completely separate, non-representative department made all the decisions for them, effectively shutting them out of the political process entirely.
So how did they keep political control? Well, technically the qualifications to vote weren't based on race, but they were constantly being adjusted. It was like a moving target. Whenever it looked like more Africans might be able to qualify to vote, the financial or property requirements were just raised again. The whole thing was designed to keep the electorate almost exclusively white. Education was another really critical tool in all of this. For every single dollar spent on an African child's education, $10 were spent on a European child's. Just let that sink in. 10 to 1. This created a deliberate bottleneck, right? It limited access to higher education and skilled jobs, which in turn preserved the economic and political power of the minority. And this brings us to the core insight of the whole report. These three pillars, land,
labor, and law. They weren't separate issues at all. They were engineered to be a single, interlocking, self-reinforcing system. Each part supported the others.
You can really see it as a three-step playbook. Step 1, control the land. That creates economic dependency. Step 2, use that dependency to create a controlled, cheap labor force. And Step 3, build a legal and political system to make sure none of it can ever change. Each step just locks the next one right into place.
And the human impact of this whole interlocking system? It's captured so powerfully in this 1972 quote from Bishop Abel Muzorewa, who was a leading nationalist figure at the time. "I feel a slave in the country of my birth." It shows that it didn't matter what personal success you might achieve, the system itself was designed to make you feel completely powerless.
Ultimately, this 1975 report isn't just a dusty historical document. It's a blueprint for how a system of total control is built. And it leaves us with this huge, essential question that echoes way beyond its pages. When a society's very foundations are built on such deep, structural inequality, how do you even begin to build something new and fair?